And now, to introduce today's speaker, please welcome Father Steve Sundberg of Seattle University.
Thank you very much, Kim. I think that the person I can introduce is going to be glad she wasn't introduced by John Durbin. She is the person, the Dean of the School of Law at Seattle University, that personally hands out 325 law degrees a year so that they might serve our community. And John, she's grateful that you didn't introduce her. I get to. Kellye Testy is the Dean of Seattle University School of Law. She initially joined the law faculty in 1992. She earned her J.D. summa cum laude and first in her class from the Indiana University School of Law in 1991, where she was the Indiana Law Journal Editor-in-Chief, a member of the Order of Coif, and the John H. Edward Fellow and a Chancellor's Scholar. She's now a frequent lecturer nationally in areas of business and commercial law. She's a leading scholar in the areas of governance reform. She's published extensively on corporate governance and other business law and economic issues. She's the founder at the Seattle University School of Law of the Access to Justice Institute and of the Seattle Journal for Social Justice and the Center for Corporations and Law. It's not often that a president gets to introduce a dean. Here's a great one, a new vibrant voice in our legal and civic community, Kellye Testy of Seattle University.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you, Steve, very much for that very kind introduction. It's a real pleasure and honor to be with Rotary of Seattle today. I've been asked to offer some brief remarks on your mission of service, and in particular, your mission of service above self. Let me start by letting you know that I have long admired Rotary for its devotion to service, and congratulate and thank all of you, each and all of you, for the many good works that you do, both individually and together as this group in Seattle. Like Rotary, the law school that I have the honor of leading here in Seattle is strongly committed to service as one of our core values, and so we share this commitment with one another. Let me start my reflections today on service with a little bit of a confession. The confession is that I love words. Well, there's a big surprise for a lawyer, you may be thinking. You lawyers charge us too much. You speak and write in ways that we don't quite understand. Of course you love words. Well, first let me say that I'm sure we're worth the money. I'm actually sure we're on the side of the angels, quite frankly. And I'm also sure we should use plain English a little bit more than we do. But law, after all, is made up of words, and that's where my love of words comes from. The rule of law is a commitment to be governed by clear rules that are promulgated in advance and then fairly and consistently applied. I see law as the peaceful pathway to justice, a choice other than violence, a choice other than might makes right. And that peaceful architecture of our society that's built on words, that is our law in our Constitution, in our statutes, and of course in our legal process and in our courts every day. Now, having confessed my love of words to you today, there's one word in particular that I'm attached to that I want to share with you. And given what I've just said, and perhaps from my introduction, the values and commitments that you suspect I have, you might be expecting me to choose a word like peace, or justice, or truth, or ethics, or leadership, which is something I speak on from time to time. Those are all worthy options indeed, but my choice today is otherwise. I mean that quite literally, the word otherwise. For it's this word, as I'll explain, that best embodies my own journey to a lifelong commitment to service, and that continues every day to inspire me toward service for others as a core value. So how is that so? How can the word otherwise do that, you might fairly ask? Well, let me explain with first a story, and second a poem, and then last a little bit of a story from the classroom. First, the story. Travel back with me, if you will, to my growing up years, which, as I've shared around the table today, was done in southern Indiana. That's a place where the dominant religion is not Catholicism, sorry, Father Steve, but basketball. It's akin to a religion because, like faith, it can sometimes trump dividers like race and class, and it can unite people of common spirit and devotion. It's also a little bit like religion in that faith can sometimes trump reason, like when people forgave Bobby Knight for throwing a chair across the gymnasium. And also like in the movie Hoosiers that many of you may have seen, where the little team does many times actually beat the big team. Now, I was a core participant in this creed of basketball, and for those of you who may not love that sport, let me explain that I was what's called a point guard, the one who's supposed to be the leader of the team, kind of making the team work. And my dad, who'd also been a point guard and took basketball pretty seriously, before each game he would talk to me individually. He was both coach and dad, and his exhortations always took the following form. It'd be something like this: Kellye, it's the big game, and your team's going to be nervous. You have to be otherwise. Kellye, the team's played 5 days in a row. They're lagging down the court. You have to be otherwise. Kellye, everyone cares only about scoring and seeing their name in the paper. You have to be otherwise. And so I grew up knowing that I had to be otherwise. What that meant for me was several things. First, I think it meant that being different was actually a good thing. It was something that would make a team work. And too often in our society, difference is equated with negativity. This taught me otherwise. All being the same was not going to get us much of anywhere. We couldn't have everybody shooting at the same time, right? And I've learned that lesson since, that being all the same does not help us, not in the workplace, not in society, that difference is very much valued. And at our law school, we achieve our excellence through our diversity. Now, I also learned that I needed to hone a context-sensitive leadership that put service above self and rallied others around a common goal. And so that lesson of otherwise was very helpful to me in that sense. Now, let me turn to the poem that I promised that I would share with you. I'm quite sure that what drew me to law and words and my love of words was my first love, which is poetry. And there's one poem that's always been really inspirational to me, and its title, you guessed it, is Otherwise. Let me share the words of that poem with you. It's by Dean Kellye. The poem says, I got out of bed on 2 strong legs. It might have been otherwise. I ate cereal, sweet milk, ripe, flawless peach. It might have been otherwise. I took the dog uphill to the birchwood, and all morning I did the work that I love. At noon I lay down with my mate. We ate dinner together at a table with silver candlesticks. It might have been otherwise. I slept in a bed in a room with paintings on the walls, and I planned another day just like this day. But one day, I know, it will be otherwise. This poem, Otherwise, by Kellye, has always reminded me that life is indeed fragile and precious, and that motivates me to constantly try and to do what I can to make this world we inhabit, for too brief a time, a better place to be. It also reminds me that we don't know what's on the other side, what's beyond this life that we lead. All we know is that it will be indeed otherwise. And that shared mystery with all the world's peoples unites us in common humanity and inspires service that is both generous and broad. Now, finally, an example from the classroom, which is a place I love to be, and as dean, I'm in far too little these days. Prior to becoming the dean of Seattle University School of Law, I always taught contracts in the first year curriculum. And given the comments today, I gather there's a few lawyers in the room, and so you probably remember your first year in contracts. It's a fundamental course, a fundamental point of the legal education, a real building block, and we teach it as a year-long course, and so you're with the students all year long. And it's a fundamental course where you explore private bargaining and the questions it raises about the limits of consent and fair uses of bargaining power. Those are the questions that we probe. Well, this year-long format really allowed me to get to know my students quite fully, and this is a class I always really enjoyed to teach so very much. And getting to know those students let us be able to explore together difficult issues of power and inequality through the lens of contract law. One day in particular, we had just come through a difficult discussion of a famous contracts case called Williams versus Walker Thomas Furniture. And I see a few shudders in the room. You know, you remember that, right? It's a difficult case because it's about a family that's buying furniture on a rent-to-own contract. And there's a very tough clause in the contract that is sometimes called a cross-collateralization clause. There's those words again, right? And what it does is it means that no matter how much you pay and no matter in what order, there's always a balance left on the items that you've bought. So that if you default, all those things are going to be taken back from you, even though you might have paid some of them off if they had applied the money first to the ones you bought first, right? And so it exacts quite a bit of pressure on the customer. Now, we talked about this case for a long while, and quite frankly, most of my students said, that's not a problem. It's the customer's fault. She's the one that didn't pay. So whatever happens, happens. If all the furniture is brought back, that's fine. Not a big deal. Well, I pushed the students, as we are prone to do in the law school, and really tried to probe more deeply together the social inequalities that might have pushed Mrs. Williams, in this case, into such a harsh contract and into the subsequent default that then came from that, where she lost her refrigerator and television and couch and everything else that she had in her home. And I noticed during class that there was one student in particular who had grown quite quiet, even though the student was often a vigorous participant in my class discussions. And so, as I often try and do when I see things like that, I tried to kind of steer my way over to her after class. And she came up to me and said, I do want to talk to you once everyone else has left. And so as they did, she shared with me with tears in her eyes that her family had been in exactly that situation, where all of their possessions had been repossessed by a merchant, leaving her as a child to see that happen to her family. And she paused and was struggling, and she said, what I want to do, Dean Testy, or Professor Testy probably at that time, she said, I want to thank you for being otherwise. And I was kind of stunned because this was a word that already meant a lot to me. And she explained what she meant by that was that she thought that we had been in the class discussion and that I had been wise about others, that she meant that we understood that not everyone is on equal footing when it comes to bargaining power, that we had really explored that we were sensitive to power and its imbalance, and that was very important in her view that lawyers be sensitive to power. Well, I think so too. Looking at the world from the bottom up, rather than the top down, provides a very different angle of vision. For some people, there's little choice in the matter. If they look up at all, it's from the bottom. For others with more privilege, that perspective may require a deliberate choice to see through the eyes of those who are not, or who do not view themselves as empowered. To be wise about others counsels one to not use power oppressively, to share it, not to hoard it, to not use it over against others, but for others. And I think that making a deliberate choice to use your power for others, to be, in short, otherwise, is a very wise choice indeed. And I congratulate all of you because I do think you make that wise choice daily in the work that you do and in joining in community here in Rotary. So thank you very much for your time, and let's now open it up for any discussion and questions. Thank you.
We have Justice Ireland with the microphone.
Excellent.
Questions? Oh, if I can come back to you in just a second, Randy. Let's start with Laura here.
Thank you, Dean Testy. You are a co-founder of the Access to Social Justice Institute there at the law school. Can you tell me what sort of the top priorities are briefly in that new institute?
Sure. We're really proud of the Access to Justice Institute, and its purpose is to inculcate in our students a commitment to public service and to serving those who are often underrepresented in law. And we believe that students can do that regardless of really what area of law practice they go into, obviously through public interest work or through classic public service work, but also just as all of you, no matter what your jobs are during the day, are public servants in the sense that you're committed to service to others. We believe that all of our students can give back to their communities through pro bono work and through other forms of public service. So that institute links our students with many opportunities in the community to serve. We're a very community-based law school that has a lot of connections in the regional equal justice community and tries to link our students with those various opportunities through that institute.
Thanks for waiting, Randy.
Thank you. Just a question about social inequality. I get confused about social inequality interacting with the rule of law. It just seems to me that it's a conflict.
The Socratic professor in me wants to ask you why it's a conflict. Okay. Sure. No, I think that the question is, how do you square social inequality with the rule of law? Are those in conflict? And I think they sometimes are in conflict. That sometimes what seems to be a neutral law on its face isn't in fact neutral when it gets applied because of social inequality. And so I think that's something that lawyers need to always be attentive to, is where those imbalances are and how what might look fair and neutral from one angle may not in fact be from another, and work to have law that is perhaps more situated in that context of reality rather than acting as if it doesn't in fact exist.
I have a question from a non-lawyer.
Non-lawyer is correct. Number one, thank you for your remarks. The question has to do with the recent Supreme Court decision regarding Philip Morris that overturned a California lower court decision and a California Supreme Court decision. And your attitude towards the observation of power, given that decision?
Don't know the decision.
The decision they overturned the ruling in a tort case awarding several $1 million to a smoker who perished, awarding several $1 million, I think it was in the neighborhood of $60 million to the family. And the state court and the state Supreme Court upheld that decision. The United States Supreme Court overturned it. And that follows relatively closely to a very disturbing decision regarding eminent domain. So what's your philosophy about that?
Yeah, well, cases like that really bring forward a lot of difficult public policy issues. So I'd want to have a long and nuanced conversation about it first and foremost. So I think that, in those areas of tort reform, there's a conflict between compensation and then deterrence. And so I think that's what the courts are struggling to balance, but I'm not certain they do in every case.
Ralph has one over here.
We from the United States or from Northern Europe often get told by people in other countries that we are otherwise, that we volunteer and we do these things. How could you teach your students to extend that kind of philosophy to emerging nations?
Great question, and so important today as in our increasingly global and interconnected society. I think it starts in law school by explicitly exploring those issues. As I became dean of our law school a couple years ago, it seemed to me that to be more consistent with our Jesuit tradition, we needed to have many more international opportunities and a much more international focus than we had at the time. And so we've since really expanded the number of opportunities our students have to work internationally, and I think to gain what I referred to in my remarks is that understanding of common humanity, that it doesn't end at a border. So through internships, through summer abroad programs, through courses themselves that address those issues, I think that helps in law schools to expand that angle of vision, and it's an important one to do.
A question from a recovering lawyer.
Thank you, Justice. May it please the court. Dean, thank you very much for the remarks and the story on otherwise. Your university has a long and storied tradition of service, and recently I read with great interest and gratitude that John McKay, our most recent U.S. attorney who's done an outstanding job, not just in that office, but in access to justice issues within our bar for decades, literally, a great leader there. I'm wondering if you could share with us what his role will be in your law school. I'm pleased to know that he'll be a member of your team.
Sure, thank you very much. He is teaching a course for us on the Constitution and terrorism. And our students are really enjoying that very, very much. And so he will continue to be a professor in the law school and teaching in his areas of expertise. He's very eager to get to know more students and have a chance to mentor and to encourage more students to work in public service. And I also am very interested in some of the work that he's doing around government and ethics and leadership. And so we're exploring several projects along that line, too.
Bob Wiley, you have a question?
Back in the classroom, were you ever able to help the Williams get their furniture back?
You mean it's not as easy as just sitting there in the classroom? It was so simple there. No, great question. Not that day, but I think what you're perhaps getting at a little bit is that how can you move from being just in a classroom and talking about doctrine and cases there to more action and effect in the world? And it's something that we think a great deal about because, you know, we educate lawyers who are going to be out working with clients. And so one of the things that complements our classroom is first and foremost a very vigorous partnership with the regional bench and bar so that our, you know, we're very integrated in that sense. But second, a very large offering of skills classes and also through our law clinic, where we actually are working with clients in the community who don't have access to legal resources and every day changing the life of a Mrs. Williams through that work.
Michael?
Dean, in the news there's been information lately about judges' salaries. How should we go about the public policy debate about how to compensate Judge Judy and the Supreme Court?
Well, I'm going to leave Judge Judy herself aside and talk about it more generally. But no, it certainly is a difficult issue. I can't remember how many years it is that federal and other judges have gone without any kind of a salary adjustment. And there is nothing more important than attracting the best and the brightest to our judiciary, whether at the state or local level. And I think all public servants know they don't move into those roles to become wealthy. That's not the motivation. But of course, you want a fair standard of living so that those good lawyers are moving into those roles. So I think that it's important to keep abreast of the cost of living adjustments. I'm not sure that's even happened at the federal level. I know less about the state level here.
We have someone who's not now and never been a lawyer.
Is that good or bad?
All these disclaimers, Justice Iron.
You know, John Durbin reminded us that lawyers are the largest classification in this club, and that probably says some pretty good things because this is a Rotary club, and the fact that we always have and always will have so many lawyers means that an awful lot of members of that profession are doing what you're talking about. At the same time, his criticism of lawyers is not just John, and the plaintiff's bar is out there and has given all of us who are hopefully trying to do the right thing an unpleasant experience at one time or another, and one that we probably don't feel is justified. And so what is being done in the law schools to maybe address the things that are legally permitted but aren't necessarily in the best interest of society?
Great question. Such an important question, too. I can speak, of course, most intimately about what's happening in our law school, but I actually think this is a movement that's shared more nationwide. There have been so many changes in the legal profession over the last many years, and many of those, I think, are brought about by some economic pressures and the changing nature of the law practice. But I think all law schools have started to become much more intentional about talking about exactly that line, where if the rule technically permits it, but should it be the standard by which you hold yourself? And so both through classrooms themselves and ethics and professionalism, co-curricular programs that draw on that. What I find to be the most effective way to get that message to students is by having lawyers who are facing those real dilemmas in our building, talking with our students about those tensions and how they resolve them. because there's nothing like being in the field itself and being able to explain that in a way that's real. And students, as you can imagine, are just so hungry to know real lawyers, which they don't really see their faculty as being. So I think that's really effective. And so I think it's that dialogue between the academy and the bar that can be most effective in trying to remedy those concerns.
Over here on your left flank.
I'm just very curious as to how your law program might be distinct from a law program, say, at a state institution, being a Jesuit institution. And I have an interest in Islamic law as an example. I'm just kind of curious as to how secular and religious law, as it begins to interact even in the U.S., increasingly, what would be your approach to that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and one I think about a lot as dean at this law school, and then having grown up, so to speak, in a state institution at Indiana University's law school. I think one of the differences that I would describe is that, and we also have experienced the change from being a secular law school to a religiously affiliated law school, in that, we once were the University of Puget Sound and then became Seattle University's law school, something I'm just delighted that occurred, and that it's been very good for us to be here and to be so supported by Seattle U. We have, I think, what I would say is an explicit permission, invitation, openness to talking very directly about values and about the intersection of religion and law. And it's something that we do in many of our classrooms and in classes in particular. But I think that that's one difference that I would cite, is that it's somewhat easier for us to do that, and it's something that I think our students are frankly craving, as those kinds of questions are really so important to us as a society right now, and the students are really eager to talk those through and to talk with the faculty about that. So I think we have a great door open to do that, and we've been stepping through it.
Father Steve, you must be very proud. I hope you noted when she talked about our Jesuit values. I thought that was very good. And I'm proud to be in a club with these lawyers. And we all make jokes at their expense, but I'd like to ask all those who graduated from law school to please stand up so we can thank you for your service to our community. That's a mighty impressive group. Which brings us to this week's pretty good rule. The pretty good rule for this week. Be yourself. If that's not good enough, try harder. Never stop working to improve yourself. See you next week. We are adjourned.
Seattle Rotary Online is made possible in part by a grant from Enterprise Seattle. For over 35 years, Enterprise Seattle has provided client-based economic development services to businesses throughout King County and its 39 cities. More information on Enterprise Seattle and how they help businesses grow and prosper can be found at www.enterpriseseattle.org. And by First Choice Health, working with the Washington Health Information Collaborative to use technology to bring better health care to patients throughout the Pacific Northwest. First Choice Health.